Okay, so yeah, my name is Matt Bezick. I'm the executive director for the Oregon Trio Association, and I've been in this role since September of 2021. Prior to that, I worked in high schools as like a trio advisor specialist working directly with students. And over the last handful of years, what we've been trying to do since we've gotten some funding from the state legislator, been able to like have some staff is kind of create a means by which we can get more trail programs funded in the state. Like everybody who has worked for these before just think they are awesome. Like the data supports it, the student impacts support it. Like it's a really awesome, sustainable way to support underrepresented students, the low income first gen students. Um, and we just want to see more of them funded, but they're like really complex grants and they're difficult to get funded. And we want to be here to try to like demystify that process and provide all kinds of support, both best practices, workshops, financial when possible, to kind of ensure that our students who can benefit from the services that we'll kind of go over here can get access to it. So this is kind of just a continuation of our work to try to just get out here within our community and make sure everyone is aware of what Trio is and how to like maximize the resources that we have to offer through the association to get these grants in your communities. So went over some of that. So yeah, we're gonna do just a background on what exactly Trio is, if you're unfamiliar with that, and kind of go over some of the specifics on how Trio grants work, specifically around like the application and timelines and like what is it I need to know if I'm interested in getting some of these grants funded in my communities, that you all can tell me. And then we'll go over just our role in the kind of supports we're looking to provide over the kind of long-term time frame of getting these funded. And then the next steps for those who are actually interested. So um, Robin, I'll probably start here and then we can just start going every other moving
Yeah,
forward. So,
totally. We also had a few more people join, so I was just wanting to get a sense for who was in the room.
yeah, let's do it.
For those that just joined, we have Courtney from PCC and we have Caroline from Treasure Valley Community College. And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves for us as well. Oh, another PCC person, Cynthia. Wonderful. And what area of PCC are you with? Advising. Great. Okay, thank you. Oh, boy.
And I do advising as well, and I work with students in our construction, manufacturing, and technology.
Awesome. Okay.
Becca Wagner, I'm from the Oregon State University. I work in the registrar's office and transfer course certification.
Okay, wonderful. Great. So we have two more PCC. I don't know if you were able to hear. And then you said OSU? Yes. Wonderful.
Okay.
Registrar's office. Great.
Wonderful.
Okay. So to give some background on TRIO programs, so the first TRIO program was Upward Bound that was created as part of the War on Poverty. And Upward Bound is a program that supports high school students from low-income first-gen families to provide more intensive supports at a very ongoing basis throughout their time in high school to prepare them to go on to college. And then in 1965, the Higher Ed Act introduced Educational Talent Search, which is one of the programs that is gonna be submitting for the grant this next year or this year, later in 2025. And so that is also a high school program, but it starts also in middle school. You can have middle school and high school students, and that serves a much bigger population with less intensive services. So you're looking for students from those same backgrounds that have the potential to pursue higher ed and to help guide them in that direction. And then in 68, there was the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act. And that's when Student Support Services, the SSS, the one that I used to work in down in Southern Oregon. And that is the one that works on retention and graduation among current college students, both at the community college level and at the universities. And again, still looking at low income and first generation students. And with SSS, it also looks at students with disabilities. And then the term TRIO was coined based off those three programs. So when people ask, what does TRIO stand for? It doesn't. It was coined way back. And then we kept adding more and more programs, but still called it TRIO. So there are now 7 student serving programs focused on low income and first generation. And we'll get into more of those as we go on. Anything else you want to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, so part of the reason we like showing these is like this is a 60-year-old federal program. It predates the U.S. Department of Education, and especially in light of like current events and stuff, like there's all this uncertainty with federal funding, with initiatives that are designed to help disadvantaged students. And TRIO is for decades been able to kind of like be this middle ground and this nonpartisan organization. We often like will hear from our national advocates that even during maybe more conservative terms or what the presidency is, TRIO can often still get increases in funding because though conservatives may not support as many social service programs, they'll still support a few, and they need to be like data proven, like they need to know that they're going to work and be worth the investment. And TRIO's always been able to kind of bridge the gap of regardless of where leadership is. Some of the current even largest TRIO advocates in Congress are Republicans. A number of the caucus members are Republicans. So all that to be said, just that this is a big national program that's $1.3 billion as part of the U.S. Department of Education budget, the largest grant program operated by them. So it is a very big, large, like national impact program. And it's been around a long time. So part of the incentive of trying to get our communities to apply for these is we have grants that date back to the 60s. Some of the Oregon grants go back that far. Like this really can be fundamentally a way to change your community, whether that's at the college environment through an SSS or through one of these community-based or high school programs. Like these are things that can be in your community for generations and start getting more college going students from the kind of low income and first gen programs. So just kind of go back to like, what is TRIO? Why is it impactful? Now, we were talking about the different types of TRIO programs. So we want to just kind of show at a glance what those look like. So even though it's called TRIO, like we said, there are on here, you can see there's Talent Search, there's an Upward Bound, there's an Upward Bound Math Science, there's a Veterans Upward Bound, and then for student support services, there's a Classic, which you see as the regular SSS, but you can also serve ESL students, students with disabilities. It can be STEM focused, teacher prep focused, it can be veterans focused, lots of variants within there. And then we have a McNair, like PhD prep program, as well as Educational Opportunity Center. So even that is like kind of more than 7. So all of these are incorporated within TRIO itself. And it's important to know that you can have multiple grants. So if you are a college institution looking to directly serve students, you can only have like one traditional SSS unless you have multiple campuses. So, PCC in the room, because there's like the distinct multiple campuses, even though I know that some of the strategy has gone away from that, it's possible to write for like multiple SSS programs. Or what you do is you write for programs that specifically serve ESL or STEM, or Western Oregon University has like a teacher prep. So it's all these individual kind of populations that are separate from one another. So programs can have multiples. And then when we look at the high school programs, it's that to an even greater extent, because as long as your target schools, high schools, middle schools that you are serving are distinctly different, you can bunch a lot of them together. So it's possible to have, Oregon State University, it's more on the upper bound front. This last competition in 2021, they had submitted 26 total grants to serve high schools through the upper bound and that math science program all over the state. And I want to say 6 of them were funded. So this can be an opportunity to bring in significant amounts of funds into the program. So what you see with a number next to each of these basically represents the number of students you're funded to serve. So this helps you get a sense for what each program is trying to do as well. So the Talent Search is about like information distribution and kind of college access field trips, getting them lots of exposure, and you serve caseloads of 500 students per grant. Like Robin was saying, with the upper bound, it's much more like hands-on and highly intensive, which is why the grants only serve 60 students. Similar to the veterans upper bound, obviously those are returning veterans who have a lot of um, usually GI Bills and resources to use, and getting them re-engaged with higher education. On the SSS side, it's kind of that in between, because they want more hands-on support around advising and academic supports. So you see anywhere from 100 to 140, depending on the grant size. Those McNair programs right now, we only have 3 in the state: Portland State University, University of Oregon, and Southern Oregon University. Those serve a very small cohort, and it's highly intensive because you're trying to get current undergrad students, like, increase their experience and all of their qualifications on their CVs and stuff, so that way they can be applicants for grad school or for PhD programs. And then lastly is education opportunity centers. These are intended to be like out in your community. You want to re-engage just people with additional training, whether it is workforce development training. It can be even just getting a GED, just enrolling in 1 or 2 classes. Like, it's trying to just be out in the community and encourage folks that, like, our community colleges, our universities are a pathway for you to improve your life. So they are immensely like soft touch. Oftentimes, of those thousands of students, you're only interacting with them like one single time to help them fill out an application to a college, or help them complete a FAFSA, or help them pick out some classes, but way more soft touch than what you see with some of those other programs. And with all of these grants, they all basically function on the exact same amount of grant funds. So any one of these that would be funded for a new grant, they all kind of have the same starting point. Right now, that's about $275,000 per year. So you can see the amount that you can do with each student just depends on which grant that you have funded. Robin, do you have anything else here?
I don't, but I wanted to ask if there are any questions about all those different TRIO programs. Yes.
The numbers that you show there, that's per institution, that's the capacity for service?
Per grant.
Right.
No, that's per grant. So if your institution is applying for a talent search grant, it would be to serve 500 students. So it's not from one high school. You can add as many schools as you're wanting to help create that. But yeah, it's per grant. So if PCC was the one to write that grant, they would be looking at serving 500 students across your district between middle school and high school. Yeah. Mhm.
Can you remind me, would that be the students we're serving, is that annually or?
Annually.
across the board?
Annually. Yeah, but they do tier it, so they don't expect you to be able to serve all 500 in that first year of the grant. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything? Oh, we have another question. Yes. Yeah. Let's get in the weeds. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There is grant money that isn't being used.
No, if they receive, they do an initial award. And then if some of those grant awardees aren't able to end up getting a TRIO program going or whatever, they go down the slate and will continue to fund additional programs. Or if other programs aren't using their funds and they get those federal funds back, then they can distribute to more new grants. But current grants are able to earn prior experience points. So they often have an edge to be able to keep their program going. With new programs, though, they're funded at every cycle. So there are so many that don't reapply or didn't do well and don't get those prior experience points. So we don't want to hold back anyone that's thinking of doing a new grant. We just want to provide a lot of support so you can have a very nice high level of a grant to submit. Yeah.
What are your hopes for institutions? Like, what are you hoping in terms of?
Sure. Yeah, so at the beginning, Matt was mentioning that we received some state funds to help us with this, to really reach out to all of our Oregon institutions and nonprofits to say, hey, we're here to help support you. We want to encourage more TRIO grants to come into the state, because then that's more federal funds that come to the state. So we're here just to help support you all in applying to TRIO grants so that the state can get more support with educational resources for low-income and first-gen students. Yeah. Yeah. Anything you want to add to all that, Matt?
No, I don't think so. And this kind of,
Okay.
I'll kick it over to you. This is kind of just a continuation on this, what they do.
Okay. So we go annually to Washington, DC to advocate for the TRIO programs as well. And one of the things we really feature is that these programs target low income and first generation and underserved students. We may not be featuring the underserved populations part right now with the panic around DEI. But like Matt was saying, this has always been a bipartisan program, really focusing on those populations of low income and first generation. We submit an annual performance report. Every program submits an annual performance report every year. So all the data is tracked and we can show the impact on enrollment, persistence, and completion at the pre-college level as well as at the college level. So we have that data to back up the efficiency and success of the TRIO programs. And there's standardized grant objectives. So all of the programs, like all of the Talent Search, all of the Upward Bound, they all have the same objectives so that the different grants, the different programs are all reporting on the same objectives, which also makes it easy to track and share out the information about what all is going on and the success of those programs. So TRIO is also creative and adaptable. So we have the legislation and the regulations, which keep us on this narrow focus of what TRIO is allowed to do, but the programs can customize to the needs of your community, your campus within that. So, and OTA is here to make all those connections to current grantees so that you can get some of those ideas from what other campuses and programs are doing as well. I think we're good there, Matt, unless you want to add any.
Yeah. No, unless
Okay.
there's just any questions, but we like to iterate that, like, well, for OTA, like Robin said, is both here to support the grant writing, but then like most of the work we do is supporting the current TRIO programs in existence and all those professionals. And like the programs look way different if you're in Ontario versus like Portland, right? So like how it's staffed, how it's designed, the kind of trips you do, the kind of programming that's done, like there's an immense amount of kind of gray area that let you customize programs that meet the needs of your community. That's why these are so effective and why they work. You hire locally, you build it to meet the needs of what your local economy and students are versus some cookie cutter approach. So most of the rules are just around like the few mandatory objectives that Robin mentioned and like just what you're allowed to spend federal funds on due to federal grant, restrictions. So, all right. So on the how TRIO grants work front. So all of the programs are funded through U.S. Department of Education, and they're on 5-year grant cycles. So every 5 years, you have to reapply for your grants. And all of these programs that we had just covered, like each one is kind of up again in 5 years. So one of the primary work that we are trying to do is just educate people about all of these and provide resources and support to encourage all of our institutions to apply to these grants within these 5-year grant cycles. As far as the application process, it is highly competitive because this is nationwide. Like you do need near perfect applications to be a first time funded grant. So near perfect means there's basically 100 base points that is built into the legislation. And if you're familiar at all with like the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act, it hasn't happened in like 15, 16 years now. So like that would need to get reauthorized for that base 100 points to change. And Congress is not in the business of passing things these days. So like we kind of keep going through cycles where we know the majority of the grant that you're going to write, we know a year ahead of time, it's pretty much not going to change. So that allows us to like do really good preparation and be way out ahead of when the due dates for these grants are in terms of providing resources to our community partners. The department and like the current administration can usually pick 6 to 9 additional points that are like you don't find out about until the RFP is released, right? Hey, this grant is going to be due in 45 days. And now we know what these like little extra pieces are about. So those are always changing and adapting. And we're here to like help support and bring community together to kind of generate the best responses for those. And then as Robin mentioned, there's up to 15 bonus points for continuing programs. if you have met the previous objective. So getting funded the first time can feel intimidating, and we're trying to like make you feel assured that like we are here to help provide guidance and templates and like rules and tips and tricks and make it feel way more achievable to just check all the boxes that you need to for your communities to demonstrate need, put together a good plan, valuation, all of those aspects of the grant so that you can feel like really good about the grant you are submitting. We are the only state in the entire nation that has anything even remotely close to this. We're the only state that gets funding from our state legislator. Nobody else has staff, let alone two, like me and Robin at the state level. So
The special
floor
thing.
is so immensely high that we can't guarantee they're all going to be funded, but we know everybody is going to be submitting really high quality grants. And we can never control how much funding is in the federal government, if they're going to give us increases, level funded, like who knows, especially now. Like we don't know, but all we can control is the quality of applications we write and how many and how much work we're doing within the community. And I think Robin had mentioned previously as well, like every year there are new grants funded. You're never running into a scenario where like it is hopeless, you're never going to get refunded because continuing grants don't reapply. The last 5 years has been really challenging for programs to even meet their objectives as higher ed keeps changing. So we could see an entirely kind of unprecedented turnover in the number of new grants funded. And then the hope is, should you be funded, we're going to help you. Like you're going to run a good program. We're here to help support you. And you moving forward can get a lot of those prior experience points, those bonus points. And you already are working off of a near perfect grant. So like it should sustain for hopefully decades into the future. That is the goal. So that, and a lot of the key benefits, as I said, it is just sustainable funding, right? Like assuming we can get you off the ground, get you initially motivated. Once you're up and running, like there's no reason, assuming you do a pretty good job managing these grants, that they can't just exist for a really long period of time. There is no institution matching required, both from the institution applying as well as like the schools who are participating. Now they may make some like agreements around services and space that they'll provide to you, but they don't, there's no cost element to it. In fact, there's an 8% indirect that goes to the applying institution as like an offset for facilitating and managing the grant. And then the long-term student success outcomes, these can tie very much to institutional goals. So with those college programs, like these tend to be your hard to reach populations that usually struggle more than maybe your average student. These programs are going to ensure that these students have higher success rates. Like all colleges, community colleges should want some of these TRIO SSS programs on their campus. It's just free money to hire more staff to provide more support. And then even from the high school programs, like you are not a recruiting arm for the college, but if you are serving a lot of high school students and you're bringing them to campuses and you're getting them exposure to college going information, like what we see in the communities that have our pre-college programs is more of those students from those local high schools are enrolling in your institution. So even though there may not be a direct benefit, if you're talking to some higher up executive within the institution, like you can show with data over time that like, hey, there's like a massive, like I used to work at Clatsop Community College. It was something like 65% of the FTE students were former TRIO students at that college. Now, granted, they're smaller, but like there's a clear benefit to the college by having even the high school programs in their community. Robin, anything else on this front?
I don't think so. Any questions from this slide? Okay. Okay, so some of the support. So I talked a little bit about some of them, but we provide that ongoing grant application support. So we just had last week in Eugene a free training on the talent search, and we've also started our free training on the Educational Opportunity Center grant writing prep. And then we're also recording those so we can share those out with people that weren't able to attend that are interested. We have our grant writing toolkits and shared resources for how to, really maximize that application. There's ongoing connection calls that we offer either weekly or every other week, depending on what the request is of all the grant writers and directors. And then we also offer to read your proposals. So your drafts, we can help along the way. we've been trained by a federal grant reader that's done some of those reviews of the federal grants. And so he has trained us in what to look for, how to go through the exact scoring guide that the Department of Ed uses for their readers. And so we can help provide that point system evaluation for you to give you a sense of where you're at this point. We can also do a deeper dive and, look at all the details with you. So all of that is available to everybody. There is no cost. We're using our state funds to help us fund that. And then as far as the impact so far, we're still waiting to find out on some of them. But in 2021, we had 47 TRIO grants in Oregon, and by 2025, we have 55 TRIO grants. We've submitted for the SSS that was due last July, so we're waiting for the announcement this next summer of which SSS programs are funded. So all of our SSS programs in the state submitted renewals for their grants. And then we also had a number of additional grants that were submitted in Oregon. So we're excited to announce those once that comes through. And now we're looking at the talent search and the educational opportunity grants. Those are supposed to both be due in 2025. And then Upward Bound will be next year in 2026. So we're looking at those pre-college programs right now. Sorry, the Upward Bound?
Will be the next one in 26.
Exactly. Yeah. And, go ahead.
I'll show it on the screen
Oh,
here.
wonderful. Very helpful. Yeah. There's the visual. So McNair will also be next year, but that is for universities only. And like we said, we currently have them at SOU, U of O, and PSU. And there are not very many McNairs in the country, so it is a harder one to secure.
I just want to touch on, Robert had mentioned it, but like this is all funded through outside resources. Like we are not this is not some like business model. Like our association existed way before we had funding. It was just a board of volunteers who worked in TRIO programs who would do like much smaller versions of this stuff. So our initial investment from the state legislator kind of kickstarted this, but a lot of the workshops, everything we do, like the one we just did in Eugene, like we can pay for hotel nights. All the food is free. There's no registration costs. Like even if you're not currently a TRIO grant, you're just an institution that wants to learn more, you're welcome to come and do all this stuff completely free of cost, because we see this as just like a community service aspect. So I have on here is just a lot of the other foundations who have come around too, because they love this population of student. They would love to find ways to help support this. And this is such an amazing opportunity to kind of leverage the small amount of funds these foundations have into us that can hopefully result in new TRIO grants. Like we said previously, we went from 47 to 55, but there were 10 new upper bounds, or like 10 new grants that have been funded. A couple of them had lost funding, but 10 new grants funded is $2.5 million per year coming into the state, right? That's almost 13 million. I know I'm doing some rounding, but like almost $13 million in grants funded as a result of like these investments by folks. So there's no reason our total number of TRIO grants can't get into the triple digits and just see this massive, massive amount of funds coming in federally to serve our communities. As far as like all the TRIO programs pay a membership, but it's not a lot, and it kind of just unlocks access to a bunch of other services that are kind of cost saving to begin with. So what the ultimate goal is, just provide broad access to TRIO opportunities statewide and convince our community partners that it's worth the time and effort to write these grants and pursue these opportunities in their communities.
So this one might be a little harder to see on the screen. Oh, I guess it's blown up so you can see it, but that's where our college TRIO programs are located in the state. So we have them all across. And then for our pre-college.
I can do that one. So
Okay.
this is a map. It's not, I can go to like a one where I can move around in Google, but I wanted to map all the high schools, and it just shows high schools. Obviously, Talent Search also serves middle schools, but you can see when we first started, almost all of the schools existed like near higher ed institutions, right? We see the I-5 corridor had most of the schools that we served, and then there's a couple on the coast. But the hearts represent a school we are in, the stars are a school that we are not. So there is a ton of work to be done to try to get more of the pre-college grants funded. And almost all of the organizations that facilitate these are community colleges or universities. There's like a couple nonprofits. There's a ESD who manages some programs out of Multnomah ESD, but for the most part, just convincing higher ed partners to pursue these. So we've been in the process of doing that and meeting with folks, whether you are, up in Blue Mountain or Eastern Oregon or Treasure Valley or Central Oregon Community College. Obviously, the whole like rural parts of the states, we're doing a lot of work to address. Was it Oregon Coast Community College is trying to apply for these. So like our goal is to see way more of these turn red. And the beauty of like both Town Search and Upper Bound is those grants can be in the same high school. You don't have to like pick either or. Like I don't want to get too in the weeds, but there's no reason we can't have 100 brand new grants all over the state serving all of these high schools. So this is in part some of the work we are trying to do. And like a lot of this information we can share more in depth with our partners. If you're like, okay, I would love to pursue some of these, that's kind of me. And part of our work too, because I know we have a Treasure Valley person in the room, like Eastern Oregon University in LaGrande is also kind of interested in some of these more rural schools on the eastern side of the state. So that's where we can kind of facilitate a conversation between two entities and be like, all right, let's be strategic around like who is best fit to serve particular high schools, because what you don't want is both parties applying for a grant and they both get it, and now you have two talent searches in a single high school. That is probably not sustainable really at all. So we're trying to avoid kind of the duplication as we mentioned earlier. Anything else or questions on just the where we are?
I don't think so. Okay, so when we were talking about figuring out who might be interested in applying, so does your institution serve low-income first-gen or other underrepresented students? Would a TRIO program align with your campus mission? Are you positioned to serve the secondary schools in your region? And figure out those benefits to high school partnerships to make those connections. A lot of your campuses already have those connections with the secondary schools. So that's why we think you're the prime people to be getting connected to the high schools. So for those of you that are interested, you would want to identify the point person to explore the grant opportunities. We're happy to do another one of these with your team or with interested parties. And then, of course, invite you to any upcoming grant writing workshops, our connection calls, all the stuff that we have that will be ongoing until the grants are submitted. And then you can also form those partnerships. It's kind of like the pipeline for your talent search and Upward Bound to make connections with the SSS at the college or the EOC to make connection with the SSS so that you can figure out what that pathway could be for your students in your institution.
Yeah, and obviously if you're going to be in the local high schools at all, or if it is an EOC, those are so community based. They're kind of outside the institution itself. So that's like when we say partnerships, like you have to start, even though these grants are not due until this summer, for the talent search or in the fall, like you kind of have to start doing work now to get commitments from school districts or high schools or middle schools that are saying, hey, we would love to have you all write this grant and kind of bring these services into our school. So that's kind of why, we started this back in like July, August of 2024, kind of preparing for this cycle, but it's just a really long-term aspect. So yeah, we're just trying to bring strategy and organization to these opportunities statewide. And you can see here that the cycle, I only made it so long, but it just keeps repeating every 5 years. So there is kind of a 2-year gap where we can kind of regroup and there's not any active competitions. It's one thing to feel like you want to sit out a year or like, oh, maybe I'm not ready to apply for one of these EOCs and serve my community or a talent search in 2025. It's like, well, that's fine, but just be aware. Now, with the high school programs, the upper bound is just the next summer over. So like there is still an opportunity there. But waiting means you're like waiting 5 years. Like, how many people even worked in your department 5 years ago or are connected to like the decision makers who can make these things happen? Like, it can be a little high risk to just like wait 5 years and see what happens. And one benefit too is even just applying, even if you're not funded, you get your feedback and all your scores back from the readers. So you can get, a draft completely reviewed and scored. And even if it isn't funded, you get that feedback to kind of improve future drafts. So the sooner you kind of create an initial one, not only do you have like this template that can be used for pretty much all the grants moving forward, but you start to collect that feedback and making subtle improvements because not everybody's going to get funded the first time. It might take 2 cycles, but you just feel better about it having feedback from that first one. So, yeah, we've been saying this a bunch, but like going back to that map, we want to see every single community college, every 4-year university, even private schools. Like, we want every higher ed institution to have an SSS grant. And there are so many high schools that are low income and first gen. Like, there's enough data and need to clearly get all the points that the feds are looking for to demonstrate that there's a need for these kind of programs in our state. So all that's left is for us to be organized enough to put together the rest of the pieces around it to help support the programs and to find the community partners willing to do this work for these grants. So our goal is to just see massive, massive expansion so that all these students statewide can get access to these resources. Because at the end of the day, like, both Robin and I got to work with students. And like, if you had to describe in like a nutshell, what is TRIO? I just say like, TRIO is mostly people. Almost all the money goes towards hiring staff. Doesn't matter what version of the grant you are at. And those staff members, their job is to be like the student's person. What I mean by person is most people had an individual. If you've gone into college, higher ed in any way, shape, or form, you had a teacher, an uncle, a neighbor, parents. Like, there's some person you can identify in your life that sat you down and asked the question, like, hey, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And you're just like, oh man, no one's asked me that yet. Holy smokes. Or like help to motivate you or inspire you to go be more than, you know, what your maybe family had previously done or to pursue higher education degrees. Like, uh, just be that moment of inspiration, the little spark. You may not even remember their name, but like in my case, like, I don't remember their name. I just remember some school counselor who actually took the time. I was a senior that sat me down. Was like, what are you actually doing after high school? And it just hit me like, oh man, I hadn't thought about it yet. Thank you for asking. We should sit here and make a plan. So TRIO is just hundreds of those people all over the state, right? The nearly 12,000 students that we serve, those 12,000 students have a person who is that for them, and it's TRIO, right? So it is just lighting the spark, being the like person who just cares, who gives a damn about the person you want to be, wants to see you like maximize your potential. And then they just try to remove as many barriers as possible so you can pursue your dreams and your aspirations. And like, why wouldn't we want as many of those people as humanly possible all over the state? So that in a nutshell is TRIO. We're just the like secret sauce, just go get them people that just believe in the potential of all students and want to see them be their best. So we want students everywhere to have the opportunity to have that person, have their Robin, have their Matt that checks in with them and makes them feel inspired to go pursue being a nurse or an engineer, or just go to college and just get a phlebotomy degree because they've been homeless their entire life and never thought they'd graduate high school, right? Like, there's so many, such a huge spectrum of what success can look like. And we kind of don't care what it looks like. We care about you as the individual. That's the beauty of it. There's all these big numbers, all this big data. At the end of the day, it's just you and the student across from you. And like, how do you help them improve their life through education? And that's the job. That's all that matters in those 10 minutes, 30 minutes you're meeting with that student. So I got on a soapbox there. Anything else, Robin, or any other questions?
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions. We have just 5 more minutes, so if there's any questions about TRIO grants, or I know some of your institutions are interested in applying, and others already have them. So I feel like even if you're not the person in the room that's doing it, just know your institution is actively pursuing these opportunities. So
Trio has had bipartisan support.
I think because low income and first generation college students exist in all the states and the recognition that they are less successful without those additional supports. Yeah. And it neutralizes it. I mean, you know, it started as a civil rights initiative, but with that specific framework of low income first gen. So it didn't start, and it still doesn't have race as a component. It's something that has been documented, so I don't know if it's going to continue being documented, but it's not anything that counts towards objectives or eligibility or anything like that. Except in McNair. McNair is the one program, that's the program that serves current college students looking to go into a PhD. They do have an eligibility as an underrepresented population as one of their eligibilities, which is why they've become a target from the right in this last year and probably before as well. Because the intent is to get more people that look like them to become professors in the institutions. So that was the intent there. And you also had a question?
When grants are not renewed, what kind of a postmortem happens to determine like what happened?
Yeah, there is no grace period, like when the grant is over, it's over with its federal funding, unless some of those really old grants had like extra years that they got from their prior experience years ago. They used to do it differently and it created all sorts of chaos. So they don't do that anymore. But some old programs still have like a banked year that they could use if they ran out of funding. But for the majority, once that grant is over, then it's up to the institution to figure out if they're gonna try and fund it institutionally or just fully dismantle it or take parts of it to incorporate into other areas. But yeah, if a grant is defunded, then that's the end of that program federally. Yeah.
And so if somebody like had a grant and then they went to go reapply for that grant and they were told no.
I mean, they would be told no if they had not written a good solid grant and if they had not earned any prior experience points. So the prior experience points are just from years 2, 3, and 4. So they don't expect you in that first year to be able to get all the way up. But so tracking your objectives in years 2, 3, and 4 is what makes up those potential 15 points that can help elevate your application to resecure funding.
Is that process a fairly, like, is that a newer process or is that the same process?
That's the same process they've been doing. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions at this point? No?
So.
Yeah.
I guess my question, and this is probably a deeper dive, because maybe not, I don't know. So we are having, at my institution, we're having a lot of data collection conversations. Because we have a lot of different systems that don't talk to each other, right? And there are a lot of different systems that aren't being used to the capability that they could be. So thinking about, like the specific data and measurement points related to TRIO grants, what should we be?
That is a
focusing on
great
at that
question.
point
Yeah.
right
So-
now? I mean, underrepresented, first gen, how do you have tips, tricks?
Yes, and Matt can address this, but first I'll just say that Matt has done a deep dive on this, and we're also hosting our annual Oregon Trio Conference is in Sun River. And we're doing our pre-conference on a deep data dive, and we're having trainers come in, and it's going to be a working session where you're going to actually be able to get that data. So the nice part about the pre-college programs is that most all of the data that you need is all public data. So as long as the census data is still up in March, then we'll be able to utilize that. But they have all these other tools too that the trainers are going to use to help you get your specific data for your specific grant. So you're going to be able to work through and gather that right then and there during that pre-conference. Matt, do you want to address more of that data collection?
Exactly what Robin said. We had done like an initial survey last summer to kind of just see, at least in the high schools, like which high schools have a decent shot of showing need. And then we kind of did the work to group them together and like, okay, of those schools, you need to serve 500 students in town search. And the way Trio grants work is to show that there's enough eligible students, you often have to triple the numbers. So we're like, okay, we need groupings of 1,500 eligible students to really have a competitive shot. So we kind of had pulled data off of census data and like the National Center for Education Statistics and the state report cards. Like there's a bunch of just publicly available data to look at free reduced lunch rates, absenteeism, poverty levels, education attainment levels, median household income, poverty levels, like just all these public indicators that you can kind of use in telling a story of why this community or why this high school is in need of these services. So for the EOCs, the Upper Bound, Town Search, all those public facing, like it's all kind of public data. Now we just did it through SSS, the college, like that is way more institutional data, but we're 4.5 years away from writing for that again. So that is kind of down the road. But it's all kind of there. And we're, as Robin said, like in a month-ish, month and a half, we'll be kind of doing a whole day convening with partners around the state and helping people know where to look for that data and collect it. And I think you had mentioned, so the Ford Family Foundation does an Oregon by the Numbers publication. So in partnership with the OSU Extension campus, they have like a data person whose whole job is to kind of collect massive amounts of data and help aggregate it and help provide it to folks like us who are trying to leverage that data to bring in federal funds to those communities. So like we have an incredible access to like, we may not even need to do lots of filters and searches because we have a connection to somebody whose like entire job is doing that for a living. So we're bringing them as well and can connect our community partners with that contact to help them do the data elements of these grants.
Yeah, so we're gonna help support with all that deep data dive. So your institution may be getting it going, but just reassure them that we're gonna be supportive through our efforts at the pre-conference, throughout the grant writing process, and with Ford to make sure that you're getting the strongest need data to secure that highest score for your grant application, and to really curate which schools you use based on securing that best data and what makes the most sense, especially in those rural institutions, for how much somebody's going to have to travel, or if you're going to have somebody there, and figuring out how that can work logistically. So we'll be a support in all of that as well. Anything else? I think we're already at time, so thank you so much. Matt put our contact info up here, and you can, mine's easy to remember, Robin at Oregon Trio. Matt's is also easy, executive director at OregonTrio.org. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. If you're wanting your institution to participate, PCC and OSU are already participating, and we're excited that Treasure Valley is also going to be participating. So we've got a good crew in here of supportive institutions that are interested in pursuing these Trio grants. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for making